Naturally, everybody is free to use words as he or she likes, but in scientific language you are bound to cling to certain distinctions so that everyone knows what you are talking about. You will remember I explained feeling as a function of valuing, and I do not attach any particular significance to feeling. I hold that feeling is a rational function if it is differentiated. When it is not differentiated, it just happens, and then it has all the archaic qualities which can be summed up by the word unreasonable, but conscious feeling is a rational function of discriminating values. If you study emotions, you will invariably find that you apply the word emotional when it concerns a condition that is characterized by physiological innovations. Therefore, you can measure emotions to a certain extent, not their psychic part, but the physiological part. You know the James Lang theory of affect. I take emotion as effect. It is the same as something affects you. It does something to you, it interferes with you. Emotion is the thing that carries you away. You are thrown out of yourself. You are beside yourself as if an explosion had moved you out of yourself and put you beside yourself. There is a quite tangible physiological condition which can be observed at the same time. So the difference would be this. Feeling has no physical or tangible physiological manifestations, while emotion is characterized by an altered physiological condition. You know that the James Lang theory of affect says that you only get really emotional when you're aware of the physiological alteration of your general condition. You can observe this when you are in a situation where you would most probably be angry. You know you are going to be angry, and then you feel the blood rushing up into your head. And then you are really angry, but not before. Before you only know you are going to be angry. But when the blood rushes up into your head, you are caught by your own anger. Immediately the body is affected. And because you realize that you're getting excited, you are twice as angry as you ought to be. Then you're in a real emotion. But when you have feeling, you have control. You are on top of the situation. And you can say, I have a very nice feeling or a very bad feeling about it. Everything is quiet and nothing happens. You can quietly inform somebody, I hate you, very nicely. But when you say it spitefully, you have an emotion. To say it quietly will not cause an emotion, either in yourself or in the other person. Emotions are most contagious. They are the real carriers of mental contagion. For instance, if you are in a crowd that is in an emotional condition, you cannot help yourself. You are in it too. You are caught by that emotion. But the feelings of other people do not concern you in the least. And for this reason, you will observe that the differentiated feeling type usually has a cooling effect upon you, while the emotional person heats you up because the fire is radiating out of him all the time. You see the flame of that emotion in his face. By sympathy, your sympathetic system gets disturbed, and you will show very much the same signs after a while. That is not so with feelings. Do I make myself clear? In terms of the relation between affects and feelings, it is a question of degree. If you have a value which is overwhelmingly strong for you, it will become an emotion at a certain point, namely when it reaches such an intensity as to cause a physiological innovation. All our mental processes probably cause slight physiological disturbances which are so small that we have not the means to demonstrate them. But we have a pretty sensitive method by which to measure emotions or the physiological part of them, and that is the psychogalvanic effect. It is based on the fact that the electrical resistance of the skin decreases under the influence of emotion. It does not decrease under the influence of feeling. I will give you an example. I made the following experiment with my former professor at the clinic. He functioned as my test partner, and I had him in the laboratory under the apparatus for measuring the psychogalvanic effect. I told him to imagine something which was intensely disagreeable to him, but of which he knew I was not aware, something unknown to me yet known to him, and exceedingly painful. So he did. He was well acquainted with such experiments and gifted with great power of concentration, so he concentrated on something, and there was almost no visible disturbance of the electrical resistance of the skin. The current did not increase at all. Then I thought I had a hunch. That very morning I had observed certain signs of something going on, and I guessed it must be hellishly disagreeable to my chief. So I thought, I am going to try something. I simply said to him, "Was not that the case of so-and-so?" mentioning the name. Instantly there was a deluge of emotion. That was the emotion. The former reaction was the feeling. It is a curious fact that hysterical pain does not cause contraction of the pupils. It is not accompanied by physiological innervation, and yet it is an intense pain. But physical pain causes contraction of the pupils. You can have an intense feeling and no physiological alteration. But as soon as you have physiological alteration, you are possessed, you are dissociated, thrown out of your own house, and the house is then free for the devils. It is true that emotions often produce physical effects, like changes in the body. But not all feelings do this. Some feelings are purely mental and don't alter the body's condition. That is the distinction I make. Since feeling is a function of values, it isn't a physiological condition. It can be as abstract as abstract thinking. Thinking is rational, and in the same way, feeling can also be rational, even though many people confuse the terms. We need a word for this process of assigning value. Traditionally, the word feeling has been used, though some object to it. I don't mind if others prefer a different term, as long as it's clearly defined. The important point is that this function of valuing exists and needs a name. For example, in German there are two words, one that means sensation, the raw input of the senses, and one that means feeling, the sense of value. Older writers sometimes mix them up, but modern psychology makes a clear distinction. Sensations belong to the senses, while feelings belong to values. If you confuse the two, it would be like saying the sensations of noble love in French. Something that sounds absurd because love isn't a bodily sensation, but an experience of value. The relation between body and mind is a very difficult question. You know that the James Lange theory says that affect is the result of physiological alteration. The question whether the body or the mind is the predominating factor will always be answered according to temperamental differences. Those who by temperament prefer the theory of the supremacy of the body will say that mental processes are epiphenomena of physiological chemistry. Those who believe more in the spirit will say the contrary. To them, the body is just the appendix of the mind, and causation lies with the spirit. It is really a philosophical question, and since I am not a philosopher, I cannot claim to make a decision. All we can know empirically is that processes of the body and processes of the mind happen together in some way which is mysterious to us. It is due to our most lamentable mind that we cannot think of body and mind as one and the same thing. Probably they are one thing, but we are unable to think it. Modern physics is subject to the same difficulty. Look at the regrettable things which happen with light. Light behaves as if it were oscillations, and it also behaves as if it were corpuscles. It needed a very complicated mathematical formula by Monsieur de Broglie to help the human mind to conceive the possibility that oscillations and corpuscles are two phenomena observed under different conditions of one and the same ultimate reality. You cannot think this, but you are forced to admit it as a postulate. In the same way, the so-called psychophysical parallelism is an insoluble problem. Take, for instance, the case of typhoid fever with psychological concomitants. If the psychic factor were mistaken for a causation, you would reach preposterous conclusions. All we can say is that there are certain physiological conditions which are clearly caused by mental disorder, and certain others which are not caused but merely accompanied by psychic processes. Body and mind are the two aspects of the living being, and that is all we know. Therefore, I prefer to say that the two things happen together in a miraculous way, and we had better leave it at that, because we cannot think of them together. For my own use, I have coined a term to illustrate this being together. I say there is a peculiar principle of synchronicity, active in the world so that things happen together somehow and behave as if they were the same, and yet for us they are not. Perhaps we shall someday discover a new kind of mathematical method by which we can prove that it must be like that. But for the time being, I am absolutely unable to tell you whether it is the body or the mind that prevails, or whether they just coexist. Between an artistic inspiration and an invasion, there is absolutely no difference. It is exactly the same. Therefore, I avoid the word pathological. I would never say that artistic inspiration is pathological, and therefore I make that exception for invasions too, because I consider that an inspiration is a perfectly normal fact. There is nothing bad in it. It is nothing out of the ordinary. Happily enough, it belongs to the order of human beings that inspiration takes place occasionally, very rarely, but it does. But it is quite certain that pathological things come in pretty much the same way, so we have to draw the line somewhere. If you are all alienists and I present to you a certain case, then you might say that that man is insane. I would say that that man is not insane for this reason, that as long as he can explain himself to me in such a way that I feel I have a contact with him, that man is not crazy. To be crazy is a very relative conception. To be crazy is a social concept. We use social restrictions and definitions in order to distinguish mental disturbances. You can say that a man is peculiar, that he behaves in an unexpected way and has funny ideas. And if he happens to live in a little town in France or Switzerland, you would say he is an original fellow, one of the most original inhabitants of that little place. But if you bring that man into the midst of Harley Street, well, he is plumb crazy. Or if a certain individual is a painter, you think he is a very original artist. But let that man be the cashier of a big bank, and the bank will experience something. Then they will say that fellow is surely crazy. But these are simply social considerations. We see the same thing in lunatic asylums. It is not an absolute increase in insanity that makes our asylums swell like monsters. It is the fact that we cannot stand abnormal people anymore, so there are apparently very many more crazy people than formerly.